Good afternoon and most welcome to Heidegger 877. It's a very lovely day today. We have a clear sky, almost some clouds in the corners, and it's this typical weather. You know this is going to last for a couple of days. Warm days but chilly nights. It's what we call high pressure. Today I will talk about a Heideggerian term called presencing. And how can I explain it? As I mentioned before, the Heideggerian neologism only works together, but I'm still going to give some short definition that is not to be completely trusted. Presencing is what presents itself. And that means a way of getting away of the ordinary reality, so to speak. What presents itself is not divided in subject versus object. And what is presencing is something for the Dasein. The Dasein, it is the experience, not me. That's very important to understand. The Dasein is the experiencer. It could be outside, inside, and Dasein and presencing, they take part in each other. They are not polarities, but it's a conjoined thing. So to simplify beyond belief, it's a little bit, he wants to get away from the ordinary gestalt of the antiquity, so to speak, the unspoken gestalt. And that is the reason he invented all these words, to get away from the amnesia, trying to see how something come to existence, instead of asking question number 2, how is existence? So you see, how does something come into existence comes before the question how existence is. And what he wanted to do, Heidegger, his grand project, and he was the first one to do that, he wants to get to the more important question, the Seinsfrage, how existence works, so to speak, or how something come to exist. So this is the movement, so to speak, of Heidegger, and it's inherited by Merleau-Ponty, Jacques Derrida, Foucault, Gadamer, I would say as well. It is a new movement, and Heidegger is sort of a first person, a pioneer in this area. So once we got that more or less covered, I will get into the lecture, and the name of this lecture 877 is How Consciousness Co-Create the Presencing. This is how I termed it. And one of the effects of deconstruction is to show how we are constantly participating in everything that presents itself. So it's not so much that we look at the present, the existence, and try to figure out what it is. We are in the actual thing. We are there participating. And this is, of course, in a very sharp contrast to the standard view that everything is happening without us being active in the presentation. And we could call this the position of a bystander, someone standing by, looking at. And this is passively looking onto or into the world from a perceived mental distance or a physical distance, or the both, without having anything whatsoever to do with what is presenting itself. So you see here maybe the difference here. And the role of a bystander, somebody standing by, is quite different from what deconstruction shows. And that what it shows is that we are already always in the text. And we have always been in the text, which is even more important. Something that Heidegger would call Entwerft, thrown into the world. And this is actually part and parcel of existence, that we are participating. So presencing is the active movement where I am there too. And here it's a bit difficult to define, even worse so if you don't have the neologism of Heidegger. But in a way, it is always like that. We are always into the picture. It is not like I need to ask you to step into the picture or participate. In a way, you have always participated and you will always participate. This is how presencing works. But there seem to be some sort of, Heidegger calls it forgetfulness. You forget somehow that you are actually in presencing. And Derrida possibly could have said that I'm trying to show that the reader is participating in the text already. And even if the reader doesn't think that himself, deconstruction will show that there is a participation. And once the participation is sort of revealed, and you understand it, it makes for a greater freedom. And this is what makes possible for the text to have a meaning. Without that, the text will be read in a clumsy, circumstantial way, random. So every person's reading of a book will be different, and there will be no signing of the book. The signing I'll get back to in the next lecture, but I'm still going to mention this and you can remember that in the next lecture. There will be no signing of the book or the text or what's presencing itself. And the other thing is, of course, the ontic movement, where we only look at existence after it has become established, or whatever you say. Or we rather forget that it is quite interesting to ask yourself how something exists, instead of only ask oneself, what is existence? Where does it come from? The arche, or whatever. And this is more or less obvious, but without our participation, the reality, the presencing, will not have the same depth. It will be shallow, it will be flat, it will literally, and this I mean completely literally, it will lack dimension. And this is something we discussed before, but the dimensionless nature of modern human being is a fact. It's not something invented. Our body mapping is something that our body-mind system constructs. And what we do today is do flattened out body maps. And to have a flattened out body map, you need to tense yourself in certain areas, you need to shut your system off, and usually everything beyond the neck is not perceived, not as much. And the amnesia, on the other hand, is something that tells us that the world is self-contained, self-consistent, and self-referential. It's a little bit that all the movement in the world could be anything, but it could be the laws. Think about it as the physical laws of the universe. They do their own work and they don't need any participation. It's a little bit, it's not exactly, but it's a little bit as Laplace answered Napoleon when he asked, where is God in your equations? And he said, there is no need for God. And he didn't say that in an emotional outburst. It was just practical. There wasn't any need. And there isn't any need for God in the amnesia. That's the whole forgetfulness. The movement is disappearing somehow. But it cannot disappear. This is what the construction shows. That is also why Heidegger called it forgetfulness. He doesn't say it's gone. If he wanted to say it's gone, he would have said that. Amnesia means that you can regain your memory. And remember also alatheia and theia. Not forgetting, that's a possibility. And that is actually how we still perceive things. I wouldn't be standing here if it's not the movement of difference. Alatheia and theia. It's an uncovering. I wouldn't be able to perceive and have a presence in and move about as I do. A careful reading, a very consistent and careful reading, not missing a point, will show that there still is an active participation. And part of that active participation sort of forgets all the time. It shuts something down, and it's a lack of knowledge somehow. The lack of knowledge is the barrier. Once we understand that we can make everything more knowledgeable, get in with knowledge, you will see that you are actually participating, and you can participate much more. And of course, in the case of deconstruction, that's a necessity to reach the text, to actually understand it, compared to the conformist reading that shuts you out from the text, makes it essentially completely, in a way, subjective and different for everyone. Monosemism, I would say, Derrida, I would call complete subjectivism. It is when you don't share a single word with anyone else. And this is tricky. This is not what we normally perceive monosemism to be, but it is exactly what it is. It's a defiance against knowing anything. It's against knowledge. And this is, of course, not how Jordan Peterson perceives Heidegger, or if he even mentioned Heidegger. Well, it's definitely not how he perceives Derrida or Foucault to be. But I would say there is a little bit more to these grand philosophers than meets the eye. It is actually both old-fashioned and modern in the same time. It's an opening up of the grand literature, I would say, and it's the savior of our intellectual tradition. Something Derrida himself and of course Foucault kept quiet about, but I think they know it somewhere. Maybe they were the true Jesuits. I don't know. My second paragraph here for my most productive morning. I woke up this morning with an incredible energy. I slept 10 hours and I used my marvelous, fantastic device from stopping me to snore. So I even put in a second paragraph here. And there is 3 indications, I would say, that shows that we are actually participating in reality. and we are not really only onlookers. The first thing is that we need meaning in the system to make it work. And without meaning, intention, the system will not work. This is something that was made very clear from the discovery of Gödel in
14 around?
1926.
1926 was so late,
That's
okay.
the magic number.
1926.
Yes, it was so late. It was 26 years later than the Paris conference. And actually still most mathematicians said that was quite early, because what he did, this deserves a lecture of its own, but it was nothing short of miraculous. The idea he had could not have been perceived at the Paris conference. It is a strike of complete genius, but it's very hard to explain. But it is a gem to be saved. But I don't think we need that just today here, just to show that the system, in the eyes of Hilbert and his colleagues, all of them I would say at the Paris conference, because there were no objections, which is very important to understand. How many delegates there were, I don't know, but it was the elite of mathematicians all over the world. And especially Russia was very good at that time, it was before the revolution. They all participated, and they all completely agree that we need to make mathematics self-servient, consistent and coherent. And that's the idea, that you can take away presencing or intention or the finger of God or man. It doesn't really matter. So that was a real idea. And they felt it with their whole system. Otherwise, somebody would have turned up and said, I object, something like that. Remember, we were in Paris. I think that's a place, if any place, where people usually object. Say, don't. Well, it is. You don't have a point there. Jacques. So you need to understand that in a way, this complete conviction that the system can be completely self-servant, it's still around. And Douglas Hofstadter, for instance, the author of Gödel, Escher, Bach, he thinks it would be enough to read his book. Enough. It weighs 800 pages and usually takes 2 years to get through. Even if you read that book, I am quite certain at this instance, after read Rolf Gachet, that won't be enough still. Even, of course, it's the challenge to read it, so go ahead and read it. But I don't think it would be enough. But it's a good indication. It's a very good indication. To make the game work, so to speak, you need meaning, and something that Ashish Dallela showed in his book, Gödel's Mistake. Meaning cannot be castigated. And meaning, let you get into the right intuitions here. Meaning is very close to what Derrida calls absence or emptiness. The possibility of existence is emptiness. And emptiness is the potentiality for existence. This is how existence comes to exist. That's just a hint. And of course, we realized somehow that we need to be participating. And it was made completely obvious, maybe at the very same time as 1926. Maybe a couple of years earlier, maybe a couple of years later. And that came with quantum mechanics. And it showed that the bigger game, but bigger, but the whole world doesn't work without participation. And that is a factor, that is a physical factor, coming from physics. So all of a sudden, and this is the second indication, enters humanity once more in physics. And it has a decisive role. A role that cannot be derived from anything else, It cannot be reduced to anything else. It's just there. And that's the role of the observer. And that shows that we are actually participating in reality as a whole. I would say this is in the same shock effect as Gödel. And one of the quantum physicists he said, I am God. Who was that? Was that Schrödinger or Heisenberg?
Schrödinger.
Schrödinger was. I am God. Remember that phrase. I'll get back to that soon.
In Latin, Deus factus sum.
Deus factus sum.
He quoted the mystics
Ah.
and applied to himself also.
Good. Well, in a way, this is, you could call it a criticism. I would call it more knowledge that shows that the world at large of Thomas Nagel, from a physicist standpoint, is wrong or not sufficiently knowledgeable. That's even better. It depends how much knowledge you have. From a certain perspective, if you don't know enough, you will actually have as a consequence that the world is at large, at least that ideology or perception. With greater knowledge, you will understand it can never be at large. Never, ever. That is not a possibility in quantum mechanics. And that is quite decisive. So that's a very strong scientific proof. And I would say the third indication, I hope I'm not being too egoistic here and talking from a biographical standpoint, speaking about how it came to my understanding. But for me, the third indication is definitely Jacques Derrida, because he shows us that without participation in the text, it becomes just like mathematics. It will not say anything. And that's why I mentioned earlier that monosemic ideas or similar one-sided things makes the text unreadable. And it also makes it completely subjective. And when I say subjective in this stand, I mean you don't know the text. You don't know the author. And it's just your take on it. It's not conjoined. It's not something you share with anyone else. You don't share it with the author of the book. You don't share it with the text in the book. You don't share it with anyone. It's a sort of de facto solipsism. But it's not solipsism in that way, of course. But in a way, it's a trying to get into some dark hole somewhere. And you are completely alone in there. And in the end, the only thing, you have this idea of monosemism, that you can sort of charge other people at and say, well, I have the meaning because it's joined by everyone else. It's identical, you could say. But we talked already about identity, and it doesn't seem to hold any force any longer. This is scary. It's horrifically enjoyable, this. Nice spring weather. This is the good idea, having two of these. So if the battery runs out, you can take the other one. Well, it's actually a bit similar to this famous painting. I don't know the painter. He's a Russian painter. He made a painting where the Cossacks were giving a letter of response to the Caliph of the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire sent a letter to the Cossacks and said that the leader of the world, the ruler of the skies, and the son of the Lord and of the son of everything wants you to surrender kindly. Please answer within 2 weeks. Something like that. Very polite. And the Cossacks sat around a table like this one, smoking big pipes, and they gave the answer to the Caliph. You son of the whore of the devil, you are not worth anything, not even what comes out of my ass, and so forth. An actual letter, they found proof about it in the late 19th century. It's not the same thing I'm doing here. It's not a big attack. Attacks are not fitting here, but it was still a funny scene. It still shows some resilience in the face of the empowering authoritarianism. Deconstruction shows that there is a stuckedness in the general reading of text today. And this stuckedness shows itself as polarities. And according to Derrida, polarities is a sign that something is amiss. You don't go into the depth of the text. And how should one think about this? Well, think about the mirror once more. The mirror reflects itself. It's a sort of self-reflection. And this self-reflection is maybe the conformist reading of a book. Instead of getting into the book, into the text, you just reflect yourself in the text. It's a doing of the ego, the I, and therefore you don't reach the text, because you need to inhabit the text, be in it. And all of a sudden something fantastic happens. The stuckedness, which is a stuckedness that is physical as much as it is mental and spiritual, it loosens up, and all of a sudden the text seems to be alive again. And the book takes effects. It changes you. This change is reading. This is true reading. No longer just storage in an archive, putting etiquettes on what's in the book, seeing everything like in the mirror from a distance and using self-identity to say meaning is the same or similar silly things. Now you come to the original sense of the book, the sense it was written in, the intention of the author. And you hear here on my wording, intention I speak about. You are there with your intention and you meet the intention of the author. It's the same as Gödel's theorem, it's the same as quantum mechanics. You are participating. And that is, according to Derrida, the absolute demand for there to be any content in the book, any knowledge at all. Without that, for every time you deconstruct, you more and more clearly get the knowledge. It won't be any knowledge otherwise. Won't be any reading. It will be just this mirror image of yourself. And he uses what I would call logic, the same as Rodolphe Gasquet uses in his book, to show that you are participatory. And that is that once you have these polarities instead, there is still a dependency. So the thing you want to highlight and make more important than any other part of the book, it is actually completely dependent on what it is marginalizing. And this is once more the mirror image. This shows that instead of a reading, it's a mirroring, it's a reflection going on. It's the same thing you had before. And that means you only project what you already have, what is a little part even of you. because you have to take all things away from yourself when you read. And this part is the one that reflects. Nothing is happening. It's like bouncing to the text. You only reach the surface of the text. And I can feel that now. When I go back to old text I have in my head, all of a sudden they spring to life in a way that is exhilarating, fantastic. All of a sudden I feel I can have true knowledge. Something that was completely shut out when I started my education was something that was left out of the picture from the very beginning. I understood that. And we joked about it. We say it's just about fancy words. I had a friend who made a program that could make its own articles, and they didn't get the highest grade, but they were still more or less taken for somebody written them, because they all look the same in some way. And that is the sense of the reflection. It's a similarity and it's a lack of creativity. And that could be easily made by a computer program, but it can't be made if there is a human being there. Then it's genuine. And that doesn't really mean, in the eyes of Derrida, neither in Gödel or in quantum mechanics, that it is emotional or subjective. Reality is when you are presencing. And there is no other reality in a way. And the only thing you do is you block out knowledge. You might be thinking knowledge is impossible, and you make do of the scrapings on the plate, or like having an orange and you just eat the peel and neglect what juicy details are inside of the orange. You are only coming to the surface, and the surface is polarity. So it's a logical way of showing, and for me that opened up. I understood I don't reach the text, and the text doesn't reach me. It's not a co-joined action. Once you understand, then you have difference. Difference could be said, this is dangerous, but difference could be said to be the essence of the world. Here I am dangerously close to sound like the first paper I read about Derrida, who was actually an analytical philosopher whose name I've forgotten, but he wrote Derrida as his essence was difference. In some way it's true, but it is true once you get into the text. There is where the difference is. And I think the author meant that difference was all over the place, and it was sort of passive. No difference comes in the text, because difference is reality. It is when it is different, and the text is difference. So with this last one from deconstruction, we have three rather strong indications that we are always already participatory. We are included in the game. We are doing things. And if we don't fully acknowledge these rules that we have, we will construct our own dummy reality, a proxy, the mirror reflection, and they are repetitive, they're not iterative. So iterative is what Derrida and also, oddly enough, fractal geometry is using to show that the world is constantly different, and this difference is reality. Whereas identity is another take on polarity, being contradictions. And we need to practice deconstruction. It's not a complete insight. It's a progression, and you do it more and more, and you get more and more skilled in it. So it's a method too that is shown here. And you're getting closer to reality, and it's always a degree factor. The old polarity says you can have these boxes that you tick in. Do you understand fully? You say yes. This is not the working of a text. I know this is often practiced within the science of literature and other subjects, where you get this multiple answers. You can tick a box. Yes, do you understand? Is this correct? It's just horrible to treat a text like that.
Today, for instance, I enrolled on a new course, early Jewish interpretations of the Bible, and there was the first question for the assignment next weekend. There was a phrase, and the question was, where do you find this phrase? So it's a kind of passive, so to say, everything is ready there. It's only to find. It's a Platonic idea.
Yeah, Platonic idea is the dialogue with Socrates and his miotic, and he has his own passivity. Socrates, he's not having this as an ideology. This is how he actually perceives the world, and he transferred that to his disciples, of course. Poor Timaeus and the other ones. Poor guys. Well, I've been there too. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Why would I spend otherwise 3 years studying linguistics? Well, it's so much better now. Now, this deconstruction is something I understand can progress forever, more or less. And it grows on you. And instead of making you more attacking text or people or views, you're more like opening up for understanding. So it's a more amicable role of philosophy, I would say, instead of this constant arguing, which doesn't lead anywhere. It's just contradictions. So this might be also a movement a little bit away from Hegel and going more to a more comprehensive understanding, where contradictions can be, but their oneness is also built into the structure. And odd enough, in a way, difference goes for sameness in a good way. Sameness in a good way. We have the same understanding of the book, and we can exchange, and that is something I already did. I had a couple of days ago, I had a phone call about an old book and spoke to an old friend, and I was all of a sudden sharing more, because it was more the same experience, without this being this identity idea, this ticking the box thing, or this passive thing. And this passivity, it's also frustrating in a way, because you want to be in on the action. You really want to have knowledge. I think there's a natural want among us human beings to know more and have a knowledge that actually informs our action, informs our lives, and makes it more fulfilling. So I think there's a very good indication here of there being much more choices. And in these choices, we don't get completely off track either. It's just the opposite. Actually, a fantastic opportunity. Well, I think I better save my energy to the next lecture here. And it's so lovely in the sun here. Let's take a rest. But thank you very much, and have a very pleasant afternoon.
Thank you.